A slight delay. So everybody, welcome. We're live right now with Dario Lapoma and Machado Majiga of DoubleDash. So hi guys, thanks so much for joining us for a live stream Q&A session after the video premiere.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Doug. It's been a fun process working through all this, and it's cool to see the finished product of the workshop, I guess.
Yeah, you guys sound fantastic. It was really fun I spent a lot of time with that video and audio, as you can imagine.
Yep.
So
yeah, I spent a fair amount of time with it too. We were talking
yeah,
about that.
yeah, I know you did, and we can tease a little bit. I think we've been talking a bit about releasing those two tracks the way that I mixed them, and then also releasing the Machado Majiga remix as kind of a small 4-track live EP. So that's something that PJCE Records fans can be looking forward to probably over the next month or so as we figure those details out. But we have those details to work out too. So hopefully, but we'll get there. So guys, I just I thought it would be good to just start with kind of a personal check-in, and I would love to hear how you guys are doing as the pandemic goes on, and all of also with the protests that are going on as well, as we are in a really incredible moment in our culture, in our society, as we are dealing with multiple crises all at once. And so it's been a tough time. I can say it certainly has for me, but I would love for you guys to just tell us how you're doing, and let's start there.
Dario, you can go first on that.
Okay. Yeah, I'm doing well, generally, personally. I'm working at a COVID site. I'm happy to be helping out. I was out of work for a while because my unit was putting a lot of people on furlough. I'm a nurse also in the hospital. So I've been really glad to be up at the testing site, interfacing with people and helping answer some questions, even though there's a lot of great questions that I don't have the answer to. So that's been a satisfying way to spend my weeks. And then also starting to expand my quarantine bubble just a little bit to include people like Machado and his roommates, who I have a lot of fun spending time with, both musically and extra musically. So that has been my rhythm for the last few months. Yeah, it's a complicated time in so many ways, like you said. So trying to just like keep community alive and keep joy a part of that, amidst so many troubling details in the world. So that's my little check-in.
Yeah. Machado?
Yeah, things I feel like have been pretty tumultuous, or at least somewhat varied for everyone. I am finally sort of finding my rhythm throughout all this. I think initially at least as far as COVID goes, when the first sort of wave hit of everything closing down and people, when the scare was, I guess, a lot more uncontained and large rather than this more methodically handled. It's interesting for me. I was furloughed. I'm still furloughed from my day job, and so it's been an interesting time financially, not really knowing what my future is going to look like in the next 2 months or in the next year or in the next 6 months. So as far as that's concerned, I've just been kind of flying by the seat of my pants. And then the protests have been ramping up, so it's been a strange experience for that. It's definitely an incredibly scary thing to see, everything that's happening. And I essentially feel like I have a curfew and I can't go out past a certain hour for my own well-being and safety, which is just a weird thing to get used to. Or the idea of seeing, one of my roommate's brother got arrested at a protest last week, and seeing a note on our kitchen stove saying, my brother's been arrested and I might not be back for a while. This, like, things that I wouldn't have expected to see in my normal regular life have now become sort of a reality. So I guess it's just kind of created this sort of Zen philosophy for me. I've really enjoyed the last couple of months in some ways, because I've had opportunities to do things that I didn't before. I mean, I was working and gigging full time, and now I'm just doing music full time. And while there's not necessarily that many gigs physically, there's a ton of music opportunities that I've been involved in. Just, I mean, I've put out 2 albums over the quarantine, and I have 2 more in the works. And then, I mean, of course, the thing that you hinted at, the EP, is another thing. So I've been very busy in that regard, and it's just been nice to enjoy the great outdoors and enjoy. I mean, when finally Dario was probably the first person to break into my quarantine bubble. So it was interesting finally, because I mean, with him, he's one of the people in almost all of my groups. So that was a very crucial step to being able to actually perform music functionally, because I live with 2 of the other people that I make music with all the other time. So
Sure.
that was a nice transition, but it's also just been nice to, I mean, now I think within the framework of things sort of not necessarily opening up, but people getting more creative with ways to still engage musically. I mean, we've been doing patio shows outdoors with good distancing, and and then live stream gigs. We did the day after we did that live stream that just premiered. We were at the 1905 doing a trio show with my roommate Stefan and actually my other roommate Pablo on trumpet. But I think because of the emergence of those new opportunities to perform, it's nice to actually start to feel like a musician again, in a sense. But it was also nice to have an incubative period to sort of reevaluate, what do I want to put out, or do I have anything that I was working on that I didn't release? Maybe I should do that. I kind of cleared my hard drive of all the projects that I thought I needed to get done, and I'm nearly done with that. And I think once I'm done with that, it'll be a really refreshing thing.
This is what he says. I've heard him say precisely those words several times. It
never ends.
And then the next time we check in, he has 3 more irons in the fire. So
well, many irons will continue to be in the fire, but I am definitely hoping to. There's some projects that I've just been sitting on for 3 years almost now that I needed to just finish. I just didn't have time because I was either at my day job or at my night job as a musician. So now I have time to do it, but finding the motivation to do it is a whole different thing. And it's something that I've kind of toyed with over the course of this whole, especially this summer, is just like, oh, well, I don't necessarily always feel like I want to do anything, even though normally I'm used to not having any time and having to do something all the time.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, I think this time is definitely introducing a lot of new priorities, I think, for all kinds of people, and in all kinds of ways, and in some ways that we aren't even really aware of. And I can say for me that it's been kind of an emotional roller coaster basically since the beginning of this. I think that I think that I think we want to move on and not spend the whole time talking about this topic, but but I will say that just it's been a time of shifting priorities in terms of what do I do personally and how do I spend my time. And then I can also say that with the Portland Jazz Composers Ensemble as an organization, it's been a time for us to reevaluate our priorities as well. And so we've been going through a really intense and fast strategic planning process, which is kind of just the way that we look at what we're doing and think hard about it and say, well, what can we do, and what's going to allow us to be financially stable in this really challenging time. That's been a big challenge, and will continue to be so probably for the rest of at least of 2020. And so we're in the same boat as any individual musician, but so I'm excited to share that as soon as we kind of get there. And so I won't say any more. I don't want to do any spoilers, but it's going to be a really exciting thing, and I'm really proud of it and excited about it. And I think that this project is kind of a little bit of a preview of what PJCE will look like over the next year. But I think also that it'll be a little bit of what we look like going beyond that. if we're still around, and I think we will be. We have a lot of supporters out there that are going to make sure that we are. So,
well, and I've got to commend you
please.
for I mean, you have you and the rest of PJCE. I'm assuming Ryan and probably a lot of the other people involved have all been working really hard, and you can tell. I mean, there's even just starting. I feel like this process lately for a lot of people, especially because of the increased web presence that people need to have, has required a lot of kickstarting energy. Like you need to put a bunch of work into getting things rolling, but then once you get things rolling, it'll be much easier. Just like I would assume PJCE's programming was when you just started doing standard programming before this whole cyber setup. So I mean, it's definitely not an easy task, and I know that organizationally you're not an incredibly large organization people wise, and you're able to like keep this reach in the community. And I feel it's nice that you're able to connect. It seems like you're going to start connecting all sorts of different musicians from different wings of the community together, and then with the audience who maybe was going to see the programming before, which I think is I mean, really impressive. I mean, I filled out your survey asking
Good.
the
Good,
things that we should do to engage the community, and getting a musician's perspective and that whole thing.
Yeah. Well, we'll be sharing not like obviously not all of the results, because there's like tons and tons of people putting in all kinds of information in there. So we kind of boiled it down, and we'll have a version that we'll be able to share. But that was one very clear preference, especially from artists, was to say, do as much as you can. They don't all need to be these big blowout things. So I think that's one thing we're taking to heart, and we're kind of working on that. But like, even as we see tonight, like the video premiere wasn't connected to the Facebook event. So all the people went to the Facebook event and they couldn't find the video premiere, and then they missed half of it. And, so it's like, it's just hard to work all that stuff out, and we'll keep working on it. But, well, before we run out of time talking about that stuff, I want to ask you guys a bit about how you started working together. Like, how did you start working together? And then I'm also curious, why did you start working together in this way? Not necessarily why are you friends and why do you work together, but like, why did you start composing this way?
Let's be clear about one thing.
Dario, you want to tell the story? Or
I feel
like
story.
you should. Yeah. You should tell a story.
I feel
when Harry met Sally.
This particular love story.
It's peculiar. I mean, it's interesting. It's an interesting story.
Yeah,
I think
I was essentially in musical hermitude, musical hiding for the last like 4 years. Essentially, when I moved to Portland for nursing school and started working full time, I made a few small efforts to like enter the jazz scene and had a few gigs in town. There's a great vocalist named Jesse Marquez who hired me on a few duo gigs, but I essentially went from freelancing a lot to really not being part of the scene when I moved up here in 2014, partially because my schedule was stringent and I was on night shift for a while. So I had a pretty rough time trying to like coordinate, even though I had many days off per week, they were different every week. And I just didn't have a bunch of like social energy. I didn't really know where to start. And so fast forward until almost a year ago now, September of last year, and I was undergoing kind of a transmutation to figure out how to bring music back into my life professionally. And I was kind of feeling like something was missing in Portland, and it turns out it was this community. And so Adam Carlson, who's another great drummer and a friend who lives in town, invited me to one of his shows at the 1905 in September. I was actually out of town that weekend. I had just like busted my ankle and was like hobbling around on crutches. And was briefly toying with the idea of becoming a music thanatologist, which for anyone who doesn't know what that weird word is, Thanos, god of death, thanatology is the art of caring for those who are dying. Music thanatology is a small subset of music therapists who play specifically for people nearing the end of their lives. And so it's a lovely spiritual intervention. I was considering leaning into it. I was actually at a conference over the weekend and came back to town to hear Adam's quintet play a show in 1905 where Machado Majiga was playing saxophone, and came up and said hi to a few people at my table, and we met there. Mentioned I was a pianist, and he was like, "Oh, we should play some music. And I was like, great, okay, cool. He seemed very, very friendly. And so
Yeah.
and I was like, oh wow, like a musician. I don't know. I was kind of nervous because I hadn't been in the scene. So then we played together. He's just set up all these sessions to introduce me to different bassists in town first and foremost, and then started having me on gigs. And I really have told him several times, but we'll say again proudly for the stream that his generosity in welcoming me into the community and really like making it so clear that the hang and the music were the priorities, like that made me feel welcome in a way that like meant a lot to me, because I was again pretty nervous having been away for a few years. Oh, you know, can I still play? Do I belong here? And so that was special. And then we had a few gigs, and then at some point at my house, all my keyboards got stolen out of my car. Long story short, I ended up replacing some of my gear. And he came over. He had a drum set set up in my living room. And at some point, we just started. I don't really know how DoubleDash started. I had a bunch of tunes. It was just easy to play together. It felt intuitive, and his musicianship made it such that a lot of these tunes that had mixed meters and like he could easily handle the music I had written. And selfishly, I really enjoyed harmony a lot and enjoy making low sounds. And so at some point we started playing just the two of us and some of my tunes first, and then Machado started writing more tunes for the group and just for larger ensembles. And so it became an intuitive collaboration amidst the other larger groups that we were starting to play out more with.
So I'll fill in the gaps in a few of the places here for the story. First, when I met Dario, it was performing with Adam Carlson Quartet, not Quintet.
Excuse me.
I was the only saxophone player. I was the only horn player. So I was playing saxophone on that gig. I wasn't playing drums, clearly, because he's a drummer. Second, the reason that I was friendly to Dario was because, I mean, he was sitting very close to the audience or to the bandstand. And we're playing this incredibly complex music that's definitely pretty niche. And you just see this guy going like this, just rocking out, but he's doing it in a way that was to the beat and suggested that he knew the songs, and these are fairly obscure songs. So I mean, it's just one of the first times I've seen a lot of people enjoying themselves at the 1905 watching jazz, but a lot of times they either don't know the repertoire if it's not standard older jazz repertoire, or if they do, they barely know it. But he had this air about him that he really knew everything, but not in necessarily in a selfish or a pompous way. But it just seemed like he was genuinely enjoying the performance, and I was like, well, if somebody's enjoying the performance, I didn't know he was a musician. I was having a conversation with somebody else initially, and he's just nodding in the background and just kind of, I mean, he seemed like he really wanted to I mean, he was like,
I wanted
you could
to
tell.
say hi, but
yeah,
I was nervous.
Contextually, I didn't know that he had been basically out of the whole scene for years. I mean, we knew a lot of people. We had a lot of mutual connections, but I've never heard of him, and I'd never met him. So it's just strange to me that even without knowing what his playing was like, that somebody would have a lot of the same interests as I did musically, and happen to show up at this show and seem to have this enthusiasm, which has still, I mean, Dario always has this enthusiasm in performing music, especially music that, I mean, original music, and his own music, my music, my roommate Stefan's music, and many other musicians. We've read all sorts of people's music around town. I mean, and I feel like when I moved here, or I moved back here 2.5 years ago, my biggest goal was to be able to perform mostly original music, just because I felt like Portland has an incredibly strong music scene, but what I wasn't seeing, at least for the younger, probably really for all ages, but for most musicians, I wasn't seeing a lot of original music being performed. But that's not because there was a lack of original music, because I knew many musicians who had all these books full of music that they maybe recorded for a CD, but then when they're playing gigs, they're only playing standards, or they're playing funk or R&B covers, which is totally commendable and respectable. But I just wanted to be able to perform original music, and Dario was one of the first people who plays a keyboard instrument who had that sort of enthusiasm and willingness to sort of engage me. And initially the the way that DoubleDash actually formed was I had him. We set him up with a bunch of different bassists, and we had a bunch of different sessions where we were kind of bringing. It was mostly playing, just kind of either open improvisation or reading my songs or songs that my roommate Pablo wrote or other things. But we read. I was asking Dario if he had music that he was interested in, because I mean he clearly had a huge, just a really broad spectrum of knowledge musically and a huge gamut of influences stylistically. So he was talking about he finished this album, which is now out. It was a solo piano album that he was sitting on for a long time. That was just all these pieces that he'd written when he was either here or when he was living in other cities. And I was asking if any of these pieces, like if he considered performing them and orchestrating them for a larger group, and he just really hadn't. I mean, a lot of them were just solo piano pieces. So I mean, the first song that we played of his was Tributary, which is a song that's on our demo album. And what's interesting about that song is I think a big aspect of the dynamic of this group is for the most part, at least for now, right now, we've been mostly just playing compositions of Dario's. I mean, I have a bunch of compositions, and when we play in a trio setting with other people, it's actually usually mostly my compositions. Like I think I have 2 times or 3 times as many compositions, but for the purpose of this group, I think it works really well to do Dario's, at least his ideas, just because he wants that broad spectrum of being able to play left and right hand and a low end and a high end, and then being able to orchestrate things however he wants. And I feel like I don't necessarily think that there are a bunch of really, really great drummers in Portland, and I think everybody sort of has their wheelhouse. And I feel like my wheelhouse is being able to comfortably move between a bunch of different meters and feels, just willy-nilly. And I think it gives Dario a lot of freedom to add beats or subtract beats or change. He can do anything he wants. He doesn't have to worry about a bass player not hearing a chord substitution that he puts in, or he can stop. And a lot of times, the thing that I think makes the duo setting better for us, at least, and allows it to be a vehicle, is I haven't really had very many players that I've met in my life where I have a natural intuition that matches or lines up with that person. Like most of Dario's inclinations, rhythmically or harmonically, are what I wouldn't go to expect. Like he doesn't subvert my expectations, and that's not necessarily that's not a bad thing. It's just something that I think works for this duo setting, because he can change things up, and I can usually pick up on it pretty quickly. And we know the framework of the arrangement of the song that he's doing. So, I mean, sometimes it's hard when we play a piece that Dario wrote that we play in DoubleDash as a trio or a quartet, because we then have to try and explain. It is all written out in sheet music form, but to try and explain all the modifications that we've made to this piece that's now, I mean, you can see in the video that we did with that last song in Vertebro, we took what was probably maybe 1 or 2 sections of an idea of a song, and then developed it into something that had we were having trouble remembering the complexity of the form. And so I think it's kind of like the double-edged sword, right? It's the up and the down of this group, is that everything is pretty intuitive. And so it's sometimes easy to fall into certain patterns, but there are also very few limitations, because I can, for the most part, orchestrate and arrange some of these pieces. So a lot of the songs that Dario presented to me initially that we were working on as a duo have kind of transformed, because and this has happened. I've been on the other end of this too. Like I'm also an electronic and hip hop producer, and I produce for jazz artists and all these sorts of things. And I had a session last week where I worked with a really great producer who I was the one playing piano and playing synth bass and doing all the parts tracking wise, but she was doing the sound design and giving me advice on how she wanted me to approach a specific line, not the actual vocabulary harmonically, but just how to play this. Maybe how do you want this to shape, and how do you want the piece to begin and end? How much texture do you want? Lots of things. It's kind of hard to think about everything at once when you're a musician or an improviser. Yeah. And I feel like it's something everybody struggles with. So I think that one of the things that makes DoubleDash nice is I try to make things as easy as possible for Dario, not rhythmically, because it's definitely all over the place, but in terms of just trying to be really clear and trying to provide framework for his music that is different than if we were to do the same songs in a trio setting, that's what I've realized is as we've played over the course of the last year, almost not even a year yet, but that's kind of what's crazy is we've played for not even a year, but these songs have transformed, and the way that we play as a duo has changed because we've sort of begun to embrace the different facets of our playing and compositional styles. When there's maybe a few of my pieces that we've tried as DoubleDash, but it also requires so much for Dario to do both all the harmonic parts, and he has a keyboard that's just doing pads and textures, and he's playing a solo, and he's playing a bass line, and he's really doing pretty much all the work. So I think because of that, it's easier to function as a duo with his music as a framework, just because he knows it much better than mine. Even though now he knows a lot of my music really well, it's just a lot. My songs are way too difficult to do as one person because there's just way too much going on harmonically and rhythmically,
and they
and
require
structurally.
A third hand.
Yeah,
I've been trying to figure out how to create an appendage.
Yeah, my pieces are pretty mean for this particular setup. When you have to multitask and do two things at once. But on the other hand, I mean, I kind of have to do the same thing when I'm playing Dario's music. I try to emulate not a drummer, but really a producer. I try to, I mean, it's something that you can probably hear in some of these pieces, but I have tons of random percussion that's sort of, I mean, my kit's usually really big, but there's no electronic anything. It's all just instruments that I'm trying to create specific timbres to make the effect of there being multiple layers of percussion rather than just one person playing a groove. And sometimes that gets kind of tough to navigate economically in the chart, both in terms of how much headroom people are hearing. Are they hearing all of these parts, or are they hearing what Dario is playing? And trying to get it all to sound. I feel like when we're really on, the duo does sound like a larger ensemble. Right. It sounds like maybe a quartet or something because there's enough texture going on. But if there's too much texture, then it can detract from the composition or even just the listener. If they're being overwhelmed with too much sound, then maybe they won't be able to appreciate it. So I mean, it's something we're constantly refining. I've been talking way more than you, so I'm done talking for now.
Here's a question for you guys. Is there a difference between rehearsing and composing?
My answer is both yes and no. My compositional process has often been a solitary one, I've kind of maturated my own compositional rhythm, which to put it in broad terms, looks usually like improvising for a while, having a tune stuck in my head, going on a bike ride and having it kind of bounce around. There's an association with physical movement, and the song kind of like, it kind of feels like a pinball machine where the ball's kind of like bumping through all these little, stagnations, and then finally it kind of like sinks in, and then I just keep on improvising over it, and then at some point cross the line into through composition. And a lot of the tunes that I wrote for the album that Machado mentioned are like big, like rhapsodic solo piano pieces that are somewhere between Rachmaninoff and Ravel,
right?
With like random aberrant improvisation sections.
But I'll add that even your DoubleDash compositions, this is something we had a gig yesterday, an outdoor gig, and my roommate Stefan, who plays bass for our trio, we were having this conversation that I think Dario's compositional style in general is very through composed. Even in the DoubleDash pieces, it's mostly using certain sections of a song as a vehicle for improvisation versus a standard jazz composition, maybe from the classic era, 50s or 60s, you would have a head, and then people would improvise over the entire form of the music. Whereas for Dario's, you very rarely improvise over the entire form of the music, and there's not always continuity in the sense that you don't necessarily cycle back to certain portions. And when we're performing live, often these songs are being stringed together in medleys, and he's using certain sections as sort of a chasm that can allow you to navigate between those two pieces. And sometimes we'll fit the two in between each other. So there'll be one song in the middle of another song, and he'll use one improvisational section to get to the next. But I think that modular design works for this group, and it works for solo piano.
It's made it really difficult in some cases to play these tunes with trios and quartets because the charts don't read like a standard jazz chart at all. And despite what I'd consider to be like a fairly strong like music notational skill that I have, I've somehow bumped up humorously time and time again when I try to bring my tunes that feel very compositionally sound to me to an ensemble where I'm trying to like explain how to make it through the chart. Like Machado said, they just don't really read down like standards. They are more like orchestrations with improvisation composed into them. Baked into them.
Yeah. Well, guys, I want to take a second here because I have a couple of people to thank. And first, I want to thank Aaron Barnes at the 1905 for letting us use the space. And so a big thank you to him, and for all of for him making his space available to artists during this time. It'd probably be simpler and easier if he didn't, but he knows that we need the space, and it was very, very helpful for us to be able to rehearse there. And then also to one of our sponsors is Belmont, and they are a break room service company, and so they are delivering coffee and like kombucha and snacks and stuff to people that are working from home. So you can learn more about them at getbelmont.com. And then also to Jim and Melinda Jackson, who also helped sponsor this event. So thank you so much, Jim and Melinda. Been great to meet you guys. And as I was telling them about this event, it was fun to tell them about you guys too. So, maybe we have. Oh yeah, actually, there's one other really important thing that I have to tell you guys. And by you guys, I mean all the folks at home on the internet. And that is that if you can dig into your pockets a little bit and pull out a few dollars digitally, we would love it if you could head over to paypal.me/sustainpjce. And you can, we're suggesting anywhere from $5 to $25, whatever makes sense for you. And there's another way you can donate, and that is to become a PJCE sustainer over at pjce.org/sustain. We love that $5 a month, $10 a month, $20 a month membership that you can do, and you're supporting events like this. And we're going to be doing more of them as the year goes on, and really looking forward to kind of be able to create these opportunities, during what's a really hard time for musicians and audiences who really miss what you guys are doing. And so if you are able to pitch in, we'd love for you to do that. You can do it at PayPal or at our website, pjce.org. Guys, let's do maybe one more question before we go.
I was going to say we should probably answer Ryan Marr's question.
Ooh, okay.
From YouTube, saying a lot of artists are having a hard time finding inspiration during this time. What are some of the things that are giving you musical inspiration right now? Sorry to hijack that. I was going to ask you to do that's exact thing that you're doing right now. So please go ahead. Dario, you can go first. I've been talking too much.
I disagree, but briefly, yeah. Man, musical inspiration looks like, there are episodes, right? There are phases we go through where certain things are inspiring us, and certain musicians specifically are. I mean, at least for me, I often listen to a record over and over again and really dig into it deep. Man, I'm not in like a huge deep listening phase right now. I think what I'm most inspired by, and you'll forgive me hopefully for making this a little bit about things larger than music, right? Sometimes, like when I didn't have this same performative and social community, I was listening deeply to a lot of different records, and so could speak more specifically to like which artist. Like I went through a huge Bjork phase. There's so many musicians who I'm inspired by, but what I want to say right now is that creatively what I've been most inspired by is the inclusion of like silliness back into my life, and like having friends where we can talk about music with the same joy that we talk about very, trivial other things. That I don't know. It's just it has mattered to have friends, musical friends in town again so deeply. And I know I mentioned this already, but like this language is kind of my first language, and I don't think I realized how much I was missing it. And so even though I'm over at this house with Machado and his roommates very often, we aren't necessarily always rehearsing or even talking about music. We're just messing around doing other fun things. And so I'm inspired by, like, now and even before the pandemic and certainly during the pandemic, is that community.
Music for the people, huh? To answer your question, Ryan, I think I think that is, I would definitely second what Dario was saying. I think in terms of my musical inspiration, the biggest thing lately has just been a combination of kind of throwing myself into the pit of despair and getting a bunch of music done, and collaborating with a ton of people, but also just seeing that happening and coalescing with others. There's just been a huge, I think it's partially kind of a necessity thing, right? A lot of people are like, oh, well, I can't go and play at all these venues that I used to play. So what's my identity how's this affect my identity as a musician? For some people, they've just switched to other things. Maybe they've taken up, maybe they're into cooking or they're into hiking and they just want to do that more. And that's their sort of creative outlet for things. Or some people, maybe they're just frustrated and they do want to be out gigging. And some people have kind of merged into the more electronic realm where they're doing, I've seen lots of, George Colligan's posting solo piano sets, and John Nastos and Chris Brown they're doing their sets in their backyards and still doing all the same music that you could see at the 1905. They're doing it there. And then the 1905 is doing their live series, which I was very happy to be a part of. Actually, the day after we recorded this session. And there are a lot of venues and places, organizations like PJCE that are now allowing people. Initially, I think there were a lot of musicians who were sort of alienated by the process of having to get their music out digitally because they're just used to being able to perform without that. For me, I'm lucky in the sense that before I moved to Portland, I didn't have any connections with any musicians, really. It was all just online. I was producing and working with jazz musicians around the world. And I sort of had to do that because there was no real music scene for me to participate in when I was living in Eastern Washington. Whereas now I moved here, and then my focus shifted entirely to gigs and trying to meet more people and trying to be a sideman, playing saxophone and playing drums and composing and trying to catch up. So I think it was an interesting switch to go back to, oh, now I do need to sit on my computer and make music, or I need to involve people. Like I put out an album called Journal where I spent the first 2 months of quarantine just sitting and finishing all these compositions that I'd been working on for either the last couple years or that I hadn't even finished or hadn't even started. I just kind of came up with some of them, but I just asked, I think it was 24 drummers that I know around the world to contribute and play drums over these pieces that I've written. And I either sent them as a really basic skeleton or I sent them a complete piece and then added things afterwards and decided that I wanted to make it a new aspect of a composition. But through doing that, it was a ton of work. I was staying up until 4 or 5 in the morning every day for like a month straight. And I just kind of forced myself to do it because I just knew I probably would lose the motivation. So something lit a fire in me. But I think projects like that, I'm not necessarily to that extent, but there are some people who have been really getting a lot out of that. Like I know Todd Marston, the pianist for Integer, also just a good friend of mine. He did 100 piano pieces. He did a piece every day for,
wow.
Well, he did multiple in a day. That was how he got to 100 so fast. But he was going to do a piece at least every day, and he got through all of those pieces. And they're all different in their own way. Some of them were dedicated to people, some of them were just improvisations, but some of them had more structure. And I think it's been interesting seeing the constraints sort of that social distancing and the limitations of that have actually afforded people to coming up with new ideas for ways to engage. And it's also opening up a new horizon for how we can view content in the future. I mean, like you were saying, this might be how PJCE functions for the next year, but beyond that, even if everything is restored to the way that it was, it would still be nice to have a larger online audience that has the ability to take part in this, because Portland has a very vibrant community and scene. The jazz community is super, super diverse. And I feel like when I moved here, one of the things that I noticed was there was kind of an underrepresentation or very, very low digital presence for a lot of these musicians. I mean, maybe they were bootleg recordings of them somebody took with their phone, but there weren't albums, there weren't studio sessions that they'd gotten video of. I mean, a lot of that stuff takes a lot of work, but there's a lot of organizations in Portland that have the resources. I mean, Left Door Streaming without them, the 1905 wouldn't be able to put on the high quality concerts that they do. But there are other organizations like that, like Open Signal also does really, really great video and multimedia work. And there's many other organizations that we just need to pair people together so that we can allow for these sorts of concerts and these events, workshops to happen. And I mean, even things like this, I'm trying to limit what I'm saying, but the one last thing I was going to say is I think that a workshop like this is a perfect example of the type of content that I totally wish I could see more, because I mean, right when quarantine sort of happened, and I was having conversations with my housemates who are musicians, who have all their own unique training and experiences that we'd never had before, because we were just too busy focusing on, we need to play here and we need to talk to these people so that we can get these gigs. And we didn't get to talk about who our favorite bass player from the 50s was, or who our favorite classical composer is. Like, these are all questions that all of us have information about. And I mean, Kirk Topfleich, another young, super talented drummer, did a whole series where he was just talking with other drummers about technique, about people that they liked, what their favorite equipment was, but all kinds of just shop top things that you wouldn't normally get to experience. And I feel like maybe I'm the only one, but there's probably a few people that want to see more than just musicians playing music, because we have all this training and we have all this experience that we don't really get to put to the test other than when we're on the playing field. So now that people are sort of navigating this field of online world, it would be interesting to see, and I'm hoping that we'll start to see different types of content from people and just kind of get a deeper look. Like we've had this conversation about the project, the DoubleDash project, with maybe 2 or 3 people since the inception. Other than that, it's just been people coming to the concerts. And I'm sure there's people who probably wanted to know all that, but maybe they just didn't have a way or a platform to ask. So I'm curious to be able to kind of peek into the minds of other artists that you get in this series and that other organizations get or start to feature. The 1905 did that too. We did a Q&A while we were performing, sort of responding to comments, which was nice. And that's kind of how they've been doing things now. It's nice to be able to that's a new format. It's not something that you would do before. If you go to a live performance, people don't necessarily tend to ask questions or feel comfortable doing so. So maybe the digital screen is its own sort of protective veil.
Yeah, exactly. It's like the first row of chairs at a real concert.
Right.
It's like the audience shield where nobody sits in those chairs. So it's like it's a shield between everybody and the players. Well, I think what you're right. You're very right about how this time is showing us that there are other ways that we can make our music accessible to audiences. And it brings to mind this conversation I had with a woman who is a donor of PJCE, and she's supported us for several years in a row. And she's like, "Boy, I love what you guys do. I sure wish I could go to a concert someday." And I was like, "You've never been to a concert?" It's like, "You've never been to a concert?" And she's like, "Yeah, I'm getting older, and I tend not to go out as much at night. And your concerts start at, even if they start at 7 p.m., it's just too late." So there's that. But then there are all other kinds of reasons why people might find, like going downtown to the old church, find that inaccessible for all kinds of reasons. And so making that content accessible, because we can live stream a concert anytime, and I think we will after this, now that we're kind of just familiar with how it works. And
people can see it. They can see it anytime. We can tune in after, because I've had lots of people who've attended live stream concerts that we've put on, but they weren't able to make it when I was actually streaming, and they were like, "Oh, I'm so glad that it was still up. I was able to watch it when I was making dinner." Or and I've done that. Like I've literally when we were playing, I think at Tavern on Cruise the other day, I think Charlie Brown was streaming at the 1905, and I missed the concert, and I was kind of disappointed. And that's usually what happens in the scene. But now when people do concerts, if it's live streamed, you can check it out afterwards, which I think is super nice and convenient.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I just wanted to kind of close this up with just the last thing, and just saying how much I appreciated kind of watching and listening to you guys communicate with each other, because I think it's kind of a special thing. I think just because of the nature of the music that you play, you've developed like a rapport with each other that's really special, I think, and also very kind of informative, I think, for other musicians. I mean, like, you know, some people might think of music as the thing where there's a conductor in the front, and obviously we usually don't have that in jazz, but even in jazz, there's usually somebody who's the leader, and depending on the situation and like how much time you have to rehearse and, you know, how big the group is, that person might be more of a dictator or less of a dictator, depending on what the goal is and, you know, what the circumstances are, blah, blah, blah. But with you guys, it's like, you know, I just really enjoyed watching you talk so clearly to each other and be so open with each other and listening so carefully to each other. Because I can tell, you know, you're doing that musically, but to kind of show how that works verbally was really fun as well. How you guys kind of go from some idea about a piece and describing it in words as best you can, and singing to each other when necessary, or maybe doing that and then using words if you have to. But I think also just at this time when we're, as a society, as a culture, you know, we're having so many problems communicating with each other, you know, showing really, really deep, effective communication as you guys are workshopping together is just cool. I mean, I think that was one thing that I was really excited about with this particular program. And also I just really enjoy the music. So you guys sound great, and thanks so much. I really appreciate having you on here, and I look forward to doing more in the future, I hope.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great experience to do this. And again, it's cool to have conversations about this stuff, because even sometimes it is just that kind of weird hieroglyphic sing-songy communication that we did in the live stream, where we don't necessarily actually talk. We just sort of exchange ideas musically or sing something, and I tried to make it intelligible as best as I could for people who aren't necessarily listening to our twin baby speak sort of strange language. But one last question that'll take about 3 seconds to answer.
Okay.
Lee Toft did ask if I play saxophone with DoubleDash, and I don't right now. I may in the future. It's also kind of I'm a little lazy because I have to bring so much drum equipment to perform with DoubleDash. I mean, I've been working on incorporating an electronic drum pad that I had just gotten into our set, and that's going to be another piece to add, because I'm going to have to bring an amp to power that, and then I'm going to have to. So I think I might incorporate saxophone into our album when we release an album, which is hopefully going to be sometime this year or maybe early next year. But I think I might just save it for more production oriented stuff, just because it's nice to be able to provide all the textures that I do percussion wise without relying on any loops or any pre-recorded things. And I'm probably just going to stick with that rather than doing that. And he said I need a sax roadie. Yeah. I need a drum roadie too. We need roadies. If anybody would like to be the DoubleDash roadie, we will pay you in hugs. I guess in this case not, because we can't hug. We'll pay you in elbow bumps and thank you.
High elbows.
Air fives.
Yeah,
we'll pay you in air fives. Someday or just help us become successful enough to where we can afford to pay for roadies. That would be nice, because I hate being a drummer for many reasons, and that's pretty much all of them. Everything else is great. But sorry, I wanted to make sure that I got everyone's questions. But
I think we covered all the big ones. But I think we're out of time. I mean, I think we can leave the rest to the imagination. And but again, thank you guys so much. I think I'm going to also do one last thing here. And I have another little. This is so fun. It's like we're on the news and we have like Chiron at the bottom.
Maiden voyage.
Exactly, right. But we would love to know from any of you that watched this program, if you're still watching or if you were with us before. I'll be following up people by email and stuff, but if you could take a survey, it's a very quick one, pjce.org/survey, and you'll get there and there's a link to to the survey, but we just wanted to have a simple link on there. But anyway, if you could let us know what you thought about this event, we would love to know what you thought, and it helps us to improve things for next time. That we're still figuring this all out and kind of tweaking things a lot, but that would help us a lot. So Dario, Machado, thank you guys so much. Have a great night, and we'll see you again soon. And thank you again for your music and your communication and your relationship, sharing that with us and letting us into it a little bit.
Yeah, and hopefully for all those who tuned in or who tune in later, that hopefully you got something out of this. And if not, then the performance should still be there if you want to check that out. And we love working with PJCE. So hopefully we can work with these folks again, and that you'll see something from us. I'm sure there's a place for that in the survey. So if so,
yeah.
And if you want to see us again, let them know. If not, then no offense taken.
Yeah, thank you, Doug.
Indeed. Thank you guys.
All of the groundwork. We appreciate it so much. And the
absolutely, it's great to work with you guys.
Yeah.
All right, bye guys. This is a thing you do, like you wave at the end of video meetings. I've noticed, like I didn't wave before. Like
it's the only way
you would hug or like shake hands or something. But this is our world now. So yeah, e-hug. I appreciate that. All right,
happy
for real this time. Good night, and we'll see you later. Thanks, guys.
Likewise. Good night, buddy.
Godspeed.